Good. Hello and welcome to the IMA podcast. Today I'll be speaking with Deepa Krishnan. Welcome on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And I'm a little shaky because this is my first time doing a podcast. This is not the first episode, but I am very new to this. I started it about 2 months back. And welcome to the show. Well, let's start with a brief on how you started and where are you today?
Sure. So I've had a very interesting and eclectic journey in that sense. Early on in my career, I started with Godrej Appliances.
Wow.
And there I was part of the marketing team. And it was an interesting role because it was a combination of marketing and new product development.
Okay.
And we're very proud to say that we are the first company to develop the first rural refrigerator for India. A very interesting process of unlocking value. And I think that journey really taught me that the Indian consumer is not necessarily only price conscious, but value conscious, even in rural markets. From there, I moved to this company called the Futures Company, which is part of WPP. And that work allowed me to work with a lot of international brands across Asia Pacific. So we had Philip Morris, then of course Unilever, Diageo, and a lot of Indian brands like Times of India. And that was an interesting period because, of course, when I was in Godrej, I was really looking at one category and delivering impact and insight. But when you're looking at multiple categories, the beauty is that you take a more 30,000 kind of foot vision and to be able to really unlock ideas of what's the next big growth opportunity for the category, what are the big innovation opportunities, what are consumer trends that are shaping the category, etc. How do I reposition brands? So that allowed me and forced me to look at the macro perspective, to look at categories which are completely unrelated to your category for big insights and growth. What I learned from that is a couple of things in that stint. One, I learned about what we call the 99% principle.
Okay.
A lot of people make the mistake of thinking that the consumer is obsessing about your brand 99% of the time, right? Even if they think of your brand for 0.0009% of their lives, you're a winner. So the sweet spot is really obsessing about what the customer wants, looking at a lot of factors like macro environment, etc. Also looking at completely unrelated categories for inspiring ideas and then coming up with a winning proposition. So that really changed my perspective of the business world. Post that, I've worked with a lot of companies. And again, I've shifted multiple industries. For me, that's a superpower because I believe that the fundamentals of business and marketing remain the same. You definitely have to understand the nuance of an industry, but you pick up. So I was then with Idea Cellular. I was looking after brand and strategy, and then moved on to becoming the CMO of Starbucks in India, which was really exciting because I joined at a time where the company wanted to grow exponentially. We were around 100 stores in the country, and the vision was to be 1,000 stores.
Wow.
So they needed someone who had strength for strong customer acquisition, for developing a brand which is loved in the world, but has to be loved in India, and for developing a very strong digital game plan loyalty framework. And that was fantastic. I learned a lot of things about how to unlock brand value for a global brand in India, how to drive very strong, sustained customer acquisition, and so on and so forth. So that was a beautiful experience. From there, I moved to Hyatt. So I was the CMO for India and Southwest Asia. And Hyatt, of course, the opportunity was, it was a brand which was not necessarily the biggest in the market, but it wanted to deliver one of the most premium experiences. And there the objective was to constantly increase market share and increase the pie of loyalty. So a lot of interesting work done there. And today I head marketing for Edelweiss Alternate Asset Advisors, the commercial real estate division. So it's been a long, interesting, very interesting journey.
So I am piqued by your first instance of working with Godrej.
Yeah.
And I want to know a little bit more about rural markets and your experience with them. And you mentioned rural fridge.
Yes.
What on earth is that?
What on earth is that indeed? So what happened at that point in time was a lot of the Korean brands like LG and Samsung were coming into the market, right? And the Indian brands realized, Godrej being one of them, that in order for us to protect our market share, not only must we shine in urban areas, we need to quickly move to rural areas where we knew these guys will take ages to make inroads, right? Also, the penetration of refrigerators in rural areas was very low.
Absolutely.
So we took on the ambitious task of developing India's first rural refrigerator. And we went in with a hypothesis thinking that it's a price problem. The refrigerator was 10,000 rupees. And we said that, okay, if we do real engineering and design engineering and thinking and get this down to 6,000, it's going to fly off the We did a huge research across various parts of rural India, north, south, east, west. And we actually realized the problem is not in the price, but it's in the value. And I'll explain. Electricity was available for only 5 to 6 hours at most in rural areas. And therefore, the customer thought, why should I spend 10,000 for something that works for 1/3 or 1/4 of the day? And therefore, we realized that we don't have to solve the price problem. We have to solve the value problem. And we came up with this really ingenious solution with our R&D team where they put a brine pack inside the freezer.
Oh,
Now, what that does is it absorbs the latent cooling when the electricity is on, and it continues to provide that environment for the next 6 hours. So automatically, the refrigerator started working for 10 to 12 hours, even without
Even without.
electricity. And we had solved the value equation.
that's a brilliant innovation.
Yeah.
Then-
So that was a learning in my career very early on that don't solve necessarily for price. I'm not saying price is not important.
Right.
Solve for value. Of course, we did a lot of other re-engineering of the refrigerator. We made it smaller in size and made it more friendly to the rural audience. The product still exists in a form in the market today. It's called Chotu Cool.
Wow.
And the interesting thing was, it not only gave us dominance in the rural markets, but it also gave us leadership in urban because the fact of the matter was electricity cuts were predominant
Absolutely.
everywhere at that point.
Absolutely.
And today it's also used in retailers for various retail small mom and pop shops across the country to store their products. So fantastic use case of unlocking a completely untouched market.
I know you've primarily focused on the urban markets, but any innovation that comes to your mind immediately for rural India, and how do you see the market has changed in rural India?
So I think maybe 10 years back, you found the whole sachet revolution everybody knows about,
Correct.
which is you solve the price problem,
Correct.
right? What I'm seeing today is there is a lot of spending power in rural markets. And I think therefore the biggest mistake one can make today is to treat them as a secondary citizen. Their aspirations are very high. There is also a lot of purchasing power, right? And digital has solved the problem of reach. Today, they completely can see everything that's happening across the world, right? So while, of course, there is always going to be some amount of price sensitivity, I think the biggest shift that's happening today is you have to talk to the rural consumer in terms of also addressing their aspiration quotient and be very sensitive about that. There is huge opportunity there. And I think that's clearly a big gap I'm seeing. The second is digital now is a very powerful force to reach the rural audience. Of course, you have to have different kind of communication, etc. But the problem of we could not reach rural audiences completely got solved. So your reach problem is over. Now the problem is only about your brand experience and your value proposition.
Is it a bit of a chicken and egg situation in the sense that now you know how to reach them,
Yeah.
but perhaps you don't know how to fulfill the aspirations?
Not really. I think the successful brands are ones who have really, for any brand, you have to really understand the customer and the consumer, right?
Absolutely.
And you have to really be in touch with them. The example that I gave you of Godrej was one of them, but a lot of brands have, in a sense, tapped into the potential of rural India. So the Shakti framework that Unilever did, it unlocked entrepreneurship. So I think the fundamental of marketing or business is that you have to understand your consumer, and that's never going to go away.
Absolutely.
To me, it's now an advantage that the reach problem is solved.
Which problems?
Now you go back to the fundamentals and address the issues.
Let me bring you back to the urban market where you
Yeah.
specialize in. What changes have you seen broadly in the, say, last 10 years, probably?
Quite a lot of changes. I think one of the most significant changes is the impact of digital and technology, right? That's really changing decision making. And I'll probably talk a little more about that later. So one is digital and what impact that's had, right? The other thing which I found 10 years back, it was millennials, which was shaping the market. Today, it's going to be Gen Z, right? So the interesting phenomenon that's happening in various parts of the world is the newer generations are creating value codes which older generations are adopting, even for brands, etc.
Okay.
And today's generation is going to be Gen Z. So I think that's really important. In the current framework, I'm definitely seeing that there is a certain impact, negative impact on discretionary, which has luckily not touched the luxury segment, but has impacted other segments, right? And therefore, how do you really talk about discretionary products, etc., in urban markets, considering the world we live in?
Give me an example.
So I used to be in Hyatt, right, which was
Correct.
hospitality.
Correct.
At a time when the world had recovered from COVID, and of course, during COVID, there was a severe impact. But post that, we actually saw revenge travel. The
Yes.
way the hospitality industry boomed was unforeseen. I'll give you some numbers. It's expected that Indians, from taking 1.5 billion trips a year in 2019, are going to cross 5 billion trips in 2027, which is next year. From $150 million spends, they're going to spend more than 450 million in the next 2 years. Revenge travel, nobody expected would be sustained. People thought that after COVID, people would travel for some time. But today, what's happened is earlier only millennials and Gen Z were living the experience economy. Today, everyone is. Everyone is saying, I would rather postpone buying that house or that fancy car, but I don't know if I'm going to be alive tomorrow. So let me travel, right? So the upper end of the market, whether it's luxury, travel, etc., is not impacted. Unfortunately, the middle end of the market is. So people are prioritizing and maybe saying that, okay, I might go for a slightly less expensive shampoo brand. And that's an impact that's there to stay.
So we've also heard, our data also shows from our travel tech members. We figured out that there has been a revenge travel, and the trend continues.
Yeah.
The larger question also that we understand is that younger people, you call them Gen Z, but even older people than Gen Z,
Yes,
they are not buying houses, they are not buying cars, they are not buying permanent assets,
absolutely.
and they have no intention to do so.
Correct.
Some of them are not even planning to start a family till late in life.
Yeah.
And for me, this is completely out of syllabus behavior. What is the overall impact it's going to have probably in the next 5 years or 10 years? That is something that I'll be very curious to understand from you.
No, you're very right. And first, let's go back to why it's happening.
Correct.
I think the newer generation is seeing less value in this permanency and no ROI, right? They are very clear that they want to experience life and therefore live it to the fullest. Now, what's the impact it's going to have? There are going to be a lot of spurts in individualistic led purchases. So whether it's travel, whether it's beauty, whether it's lifestyle, whether it's luxury products, all that's going to go up. If the size of the family comes down, you're also it's going to impact your SKU planning across categories. So in travel, for example, we had to start planning for solo vacations and giving those kind of packages. But I'm saying even in food products, your packaging is going to get impacted by that, right? So a lot of these lifestyle changes are going to fundamentally reshape how people think about products, packaging, innovation, and even marketing. Also, earlier, a lot of this was even consumed with guilt. Today, it's not. Today, it's become a right. So even the way you position some of these is because you have earned it and you deserve it, rather than it becoming those one-off things which you'll experience once in a while.
L'Oreal ad, right?
Going back to the
L'Oreal ad.
Yeah, because you're worth it.
You're worth it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, this brings me to the overall, I want to talk a little bit about the psychology of marketing. And this trend, how far do you think is driven by the COVID experience, that life is short and unpredictable? Did it have any impact on the overall kind of, shaping the thought process of the younger people?
I think definitely. In all fairness, I would say that even the millennial generation 10 years back had started showing this shift.
Okay.
But it has got accelerated in COVID. And the interesting thing is it's now spilled over to the older generation as well. The way even seniors are traveling today or buying stuff for themselves or experiencing luxury has never been seen before, right? So it had started by the millennials, but it was accelerated by COVID for sure.
So are we following any global trend, or we are out in this case?
No, I think, to be honest, I think the West to a certain extent was already experiencing this. We've caught up. We've caught up like there's no tomorrow. And in many cases, whether it's digital adoption, whether it's now also luxury, etc., we're going to outpace the West. Even if you look at digital today in India, right? Look at how powerful we are for companies like Meta, Apple, Google, etc. We are one of their defining markets. So we are going to outpace them. And that brings us to the interesting question of, if we are not going to follow in the next 5 years, Western markets, we are actually going to be the largest consumers. How are we going to shape the world?
That was exactly my question. That are we trendsetter in
We are
some
100%.
behavior?
We are right now not, because I don't think we have come to fully realize the impact. But in the next 2-3 years, companies will have to wake up to the fact that in some of these categories, India is going to set the trend.
Do you think anyone has woken up as yet?
No.
We're still following the trends of the Western kind of.
I would say that if you look at a lot of consumers today, they are, in a sense, setting their own trends. And I'll give you an example. I think Indian consumers are very clear that while they will adopt Western trends, they will not let go of their cultural ethos. And we found a very comfortable way for the two to coexist.
Correct.
When I say we have not yet really woken up to our possibility of being trendsetters, because today we're at that tipping point where in some categories we are really becoming the number one provider of that service, let's say social media. In the next couple of years, when we realize that we own it, that's when we will start shaping it for the world.
We'll have a short section because I'm very curious about your experience in Starbucks. And basically, we are a tea drinking country, right?
Yes.
Selling coffee has always been a challenge.
Yeah.
But coffee drinking has been a global trend, and we seem to have caught up with it.
Yeah.
Including elderly people like me.
Yeah.
And in that market, you have a very expensive coffee,
Yeah.
which came in with a huge brand value. How difficult was it to push, or was there a pull factor already? Was there a latent demand already in place, or you really had to push for adoption?
That's an interesting question. And I'll go back to why Starbucks is such a great, successful brand globally. When I was in Starbucks, we would always say it's not about the coffee, but it's about the people drinking coffee and selling coffee, right? Starbucks as a brand has been built on this human connection. So one of the beautiful lines that used to be there in the company is to inspire and nurture the human spirit
Okay.
with every cup, with every person, with every neighborhood, right? So it was a brand which was built on connection. And the other thing is it pioneered the concept of a third space. That space which is neither your home nor your office, right? So this was the global context. Your question, was it difficult? I think advantage we had was it was a brand that was really loved globally. But you have enough examples of brands that are loved globally and have pull, which have failed in the Indian market.
Correct.
So our job was to take that inherent advantage and spin it for India. Because it's very easy to have a brand which is strong globally and have 100 stores or 20 stores. But when you want to become 1,000 stores, you have to be relevant not only to the Mumbai and the Delhi,
Correct.
you have to be relevant to Patna, Visakhapatnam and smaller markets.
That is where the rub is, in the sense that is where the rubber hits the road.
That's correct.
And you are now again getting into a mixed market, which is rural stroke urban.
Not rural. Starbucks would never go to rural, but it would certainly go beyond the metros.
Beyond the
and it's
metros,
very
yeah.
well entrenched where the metros. So let me tell you some of the success mantras or our learnings, right? One is we realize that we will have to talk about this brand in an Indian context. And therefore, while we have to always be aspirational, we have to be approachable. That's really important. We cannot be an intimidating brand.
Got it.
So that is the first thing. So a lot of our communication was around the fact that if you're talking about connection, we have to talk about it in a way which makes sense for India. And I'll give you an example. We launched in the Gujarat market and our communication literally had 7 cups of Starbucks with all the relationship names. So it was Ma, sister, Fufa, brother, etc. And welcome to Starbucks. So connections spun in a way which makes sense for Indians because families are so important for Indians, right? Some of the other things that we also did, you talked about it being an expensive brand. It is a premium brand for sure. And our question was, how do we manage this pricing and value equation in such a way that we don't dilute the brand? We can't discount a brand like Starbucks because you would never get the experience.
Absolutely.
So we were the first in the world to introduce a cup size which is smaller than short. The starting size of Starbucks is short. So you have short, tall, the grande venti. We introduced a size called Pico, which is really small. And that gave us a segue to be close to the 200 or under 200 price bracket without discounting, right? And then, of course, a lot of menu re-engineering was done to have food like a paneer croissant or a rabdi croissant, right? Because Indians, I think the interesting thing is Indians like their Western beverages, but they're Indian food. So you want a paneer croissant over and above something very fancy because at For food, it's very culturally rooted. So these were the areas that we worked with. And today, Starbucks is close to 500 plus stores with the vision to still be at some point 1,000 stores. So I think the challenges are very different when you have a brand which is loved globally. There will always be some amount of pull. But the real question there is how do you grow exponentially to go beyond 100 stores to a 500 stores?
You've spoken a little bit about digital,
Yeah.
but overall impact on the profession itself as well as on the market.
See, huge, right? I think 15 years back, you would always have television as your primary medium
Correct.
and then print, etc. And that was the way to go. It's completely reversed. In fact, some of the companies that I've worked with, whether it's Starbucks or Hyatt, we had more than 80% of our spends on digital because our audience was consuming digital, right? So why would you be anywhere else? Now, I think interesting things that have happened because of digital. One is your targeting has become super efficient, and therefore it goes back to the fundamentals of really identify who you want to target and go after them. Your measurement and ROI has become very transparent,
Better.
which is fantastic. What has now happened is with digital, the biggest change that's happened is that you can't talk to the consumer. You have to talk with the consumer and get them in your world, right? So you are giving also the consumer the opportunity and the power to shape your brand, which didn't happen in a non-digital world.
So it's a two-way traffic now.
It's completely a two-way traffic. Sometimes you're even participating in a customer conversation without even doing anything, right? And further, what has happened now in the world of influencers and digital, the traditional model was that you would have a brand funnel of saying awareness, consideration, trial, preference, and ambassador and loyalty, etc. Today, you have a journey which may move directly from awareness to trial with the presence of digital channels if you market yourselves well with a combination of your own brand and influencers. And then, of course, as though this was not enough, AI has added further complexity to the whole thing with generative AI, predictive AI, etc. So I think digital is going to completely change the fundamentals of the way the purchase cycle was, which was very linear and step by step and took a long time. Today, you may move from awareness directly to purchase.
Correct.
You may not even go through the rest of the funnels because you may say that let me just try this brand. If I don't like, I don't want to bother about it, right?
Has the curriculum
Yeah.
and the mindset
Yeah.
changed with this change, or it still remains a little?
No, it has changed. It has changed because I think a lot of people some very famous companies have gone on record to say that they will spend a significant proportion of their money on influencers. Digital has become very predominant. So it has changed. And since you also specifically mentioned the word curriculum, it's also impacting the way kids today are learning, right? Whether it's getting into AI right at their early stages of their life. It's also getting incorporated into learnings in colleges, etc. But it has dramatically changed.
Now, let me come to the last section and let's talk a little bit of attitudes towards women in executive roles.
Sure.
How has it changed? Have you faced any difficulties because of your gender? Or
Yeah.
a little bit more on the softer side of things?
Sure. No, I think it's changed tremendously. When I started my career, I remember there used to be some times where we would go for dealer meets, and in a group of 500 people, we used to be 5 women. I was there was somebody from finance, HR, and a couple of other people, right? The ratio was completely skewed to almost to an extent that when the drinks would come out, the women would be taken out of the room so you don't have any unruly behavior. So that was an era. There was also very big in the earlier stages of my career. I would also notice that sometimes if I've met with a male colleague, even if the male colleague was junior to me, the person in the front would prefer interacting with that person than
Absolutely.
me. It has changed dramatically now. It has certainly changed dramatically. I think today you have so many women in leadership roles. I'm not saying we've reached the desired benchmark, but you have far more women in leadership roles. Women have also started owning their stories. Women are not trying to fit in and trying to be like men. They're owning their own stories and saying that this is the kind of leadership that I would like to bring in. And I think I see a huge transformation, both in the way women are pitching themselves, and it would never have happened without our male allies. I am super thankful to all my mentors and bosses, a lot of them who've been men, and also my male colleagues who constantly are encouraging us
Correct.
because any progress cannot happen without everybody being together.
Correct. Have you faced any sort of glass ceiling?
I actually have not. And I'm probably may not be representative because I do think there are glass ceilings in other areas. I've just been touchwood lucky not to, but that doesn't mean there isn't a glass ceiling.
What would be your advice to the younger people? Be a little modest. Would you have any advice for the younger people?
I would, and I'll tell you what they are. And I've always said this, that women tend to wait for perfection before they put their hand up. A man will be 50-60% ready and he'll put his hand up and say, I'm ready for the role. The woman will wait for 110%. And I think we should stop doing that. Put your hand up. That's one. The second thing is, a lot of women today as well are worried that they will come across as be seen as aggressive or pushy if they make their point, which is not fair. I don't see men really bothering about that, right? And it's not about trying to be aggressive or pushy, but I think women particularly need to stop worrying about how they are being perceived and really play with what they want to achieve. I think that would be my advice to women in specific. To everybody else, my advice would be take more risks, fail more. Because the more you fail, the more you learn and the more you will hopefully succeed.
Diba, thank you very much. Lovely speaking to you.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
KP.